Segue, to continue at once with the next musical selection or composition.
Segue, to make a transition directly from one section or theme to another.
To move smoothly and unhesitatingly from one state, situation, condition, or element to another.
Segue, to perform in the manner of the preceding section.
Segue, to make a transition from one thing to another smoothly and without interruption.
This is Segue with Dean Aldemaro Romero, a weekly program exploring the lives and work of the people of the College of Arts and Sciences at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville.
Hello everybody. Dr. Alicia Alexander was born in Blue Springs, Missouri. She obtained her bachelor's in public relations from Missouri State University, a master's in communications also from Missouri State, and her doctorate in interpersonal communication from the University of Texas at Austin. Today, she is an associate professor and chair in the Department of Speech Communication at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Welcome to Segue, Dr. Alexander.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, the first question is, how come do you become interested in interpersonal communication? Because for some people it sounds like so obvious that everybody has to have some skills in that area, but why was that the focus of your scholarship?
I have always been interested in interpersonal communication. Even from young, I was always interested in relationships and how they worked and what made them better. And when I had my first interpersonal class as an undergraduate, I loved the professor. And I felt like everything I was learning in that class was something I could use in my everyday life and something that I would need to improve for the rest of my life. And I just knew it was so useful for me, and it changed the way I saw people and relationships in the world that I wanted to share that with other people as well.
Okay. So although it sounds obvious, I think it will be a good thing for you to define for our audience what interpersonal communication is.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, at its origins, it's really about two people. And if you put more of a relationship focus, which I do, I've always been a relationship scholar in the field of interpersonal, then our roots come from a lot of places. A lot of our research comes from psychology even, and communication. And we've kind of moved out from just two people to looking at families and groups of people. But originally a lot of it was based on parent-child interaction, which comes from the roots of psychology as well. And a lot of the research came from marriage, and it's kind of shot off in different directions since then. There's a lot on siblings and adult siblings, and now grandparents and extended families, and there's a lot on blended families or step families. So it's definitely gone a lot of different directions. And, of course, the new move now is computer-mediated communication and interpersonal communication.
Now, we are not talking about just a one-on-one person from what you describe. This is in a kind of a small circle, isn't it?
Yeah. Small systems as well. So I've always studied it from a systems perspective. So I study the dyad as the primary formation of the system, and then looking at the family as a system. Or some people even look at interpersonal in organizations. So some of our organizational communication scholars are looking at interpersonal in organizations. So things like workplace relationships, superior-subordinate relationships. And really that has its roots in interpersonal communication as well.
Now, when we talk about interpersonal communication, probably we're not talking just about words, but also even physical
For sure.
language. Tell us a little about what else is involved in interpersonal communication.
Yeah, so much of it really is nonverbal communication, as we say. And scholars have said it's anywhere from to 60 to 80% of our communication is actually nonverbal. And so that includes anything from our facial expressions to your gestures, to your posture, to the things that you wear, to the car that you drive, the bumper sticker you put on your car, your backpack, your type of phone that you use. All of that communicates something to people. And often people have said that when your nonverbal communication, for example, your facial expressions, contradict your verbal, we believe the nonverbal. Even if you say, no, honey, I'm not angry with you, but your nonverbal has your arms crossed and a grumpy face, we always believe the nonverbal. So it's a very important aspect of communication that people often forget, and how powerful it is, and it's often more powerful than the spoken word.
Yeah.
And that's even where the computer-mediated communication can get a little complicated, because sometimes you're missing some of that rich aspect of communication in computer-mediated, and that's why people have so much trouble with misinterpreting sarcasm over email and texting and all the challenges that we have with that.
Once I read a book on nonverbal communication, and I was astounded by all the different clues that are there in the way you express things non-verbally.
Yeah.
But not only that, is that even the same posture or the same mannerism can mean a different thing in different cultures.
Oh, for sure.
So I wonder to what extent the cultural aspect plays a major role in how interpersonal communication works in the modern world.
It's huge. I mean, certainly that's a whole nother layer to add on to it, the verbal, the nonverbal, and then the intercultural element as well. And we've talked about that in many of our classes. Be careful when you're interacting with people of different cultures, the type of gestures that you use, the symbols especially that we have in our culture that are safe to use here are not necessarily safe in other cultures, which some of our past presidents have exhibited before on some of their travels. So, you have to be really careful with that. But yeah, I think interculturally, it's something you have to think about from do you cross your legs when you sit with someone from another culture or you travel to another country? Do you use open hand gestures versus closed hand gestures? Do you shake hands with someone? Or even as much as, do you have direct eye contact, or is that seen as threatening in that culture, where when our culture, we demand it, it's a sign of trust and respect and interest. But eye contact has different meaning in other cultures as well. So sure, that's a whole nother layer that complicates it.
And it's also the issue of personal space, because in many countries, and I can think quite rapidly, Latin American, for example, the distance between two people is much closer than the one that you see in Anglo-Saxon countries.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We talk about proxemics even in our 103, our lower level interpersonal class, and how important that use of space is culturally and across gender as well, because it can be seen as a violation of space depending if you're in the same gender or not as the partner that you're talking to. And certainly there are other cultures that prefer more space. And so you see the people from the two cultures interacting, and one keeps stepping back and one keeps stepping forward, and it might be seen as off-putting to that person if you're very far off and they're trying to move closer to you, and now they think that you don't want to communicate with them, or that you're being standoffish in some way. I always like to use the fun example in my class. It's so old now, the Seinfeld show. I don't know if you ever watched that comedy, but they have the close talker in there. And we always use that little clip in our class when we talk about proxemics, because there he is, and he's right on top of her as he's talking, and then she keeps inching back and he keeps inching forward. And you can see people's discomfort with that for sure.
It seems to me that your area of scholarship is an area that is very interdisciplinary in nature, because in addition to the cultural aspects, psychology has to also play a major role, and I was wondering if psychology was one of the required courses for people in your area. It's actually not required, and we have had several psychology majors take our classes, and our students take psychology classes, and I think they work really well together. But no, it's actually not required. I think a lot of people in my particular interest, we try to read as much psychology as we can because they do intersect so much. I wish the two fields would publish and work together more, because I do think that our research feeds into each other's really well. Some of the journals that I read a lot and publish in, they are multidisciplinary like that. Two of my favorites are the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, and that has psychology, sociology, and communication, and then one that's just called Personal Relationships. And even the family studies, the human ecology, some of those folks publish in there as well. So that's when we finally get to come together and say, hey, you're researching nonverbal communication too. Yeah.
So let's bring it together. Or personality variables, so many personality variables that psychologists study, even the basic big five they always talk about, things like introversion and extroversion play huge into communication for us. So yeah, we have to draw on psychology as well.
Now, you specialize in the area of family communication, right? And this is all say that most human problems are communication problems.
I would agree.
Can we say the same thing about families? That most of problematic, dysfunctional families is because of communication issue?
I would believe that for sure. Yes, I definitely think that. I think just about any challenge you're going through in your family could be helped with improved communication. And a lot of times it's hard to do on your own. Sometimes you need help from others, whether it's to seek therapy, which obviously that's a nice connection to interpersonal communication as well. I'm not trained to be a therapist, but I believe that's really helpful for a lot of families. Whether it's to take classes in interpersonal communication or workshops at a school or a local hospital to help you improve your communication. I was just talking to someone the other day, and they said, I have a family member who is really challenged by parenting. She's really struggling, having a really tough time raising this child, but doesn't want to seek help from others. But other people can see she really needs help. And I would say, yes, you can make that relationship so much better by learning a little bit more about communication, just some simple strategies to make everyday life better, whether it's discipline strategies, whatever that might be, that can make it not so conflictual in their family, for sure.
Now, how come members of the same family who are supposed to know each other very well for years get so much in trouble in communicating among themselves? What are the main reasons for those dysfunctional behaviors?
Well, some of it is, this kind of reminds me of some earlier research I did, which was on hurt in family relationships. And we know that of all the people we hurt the ones that we love most often and the most intensely. So we don't hurt the person that we, walk by on the street every once in a while, or our postal worker, or someone that we don't have a connection with. We hurt the people that we're the closest to. And part of it is it's that relational history, and there's so much, the common term baggage, if you will. There's so much of that we have, that we carry along, that relational history that makes us really sensitive a lot of times. It makes us, one word can set us off. And it's because we know what that one word has meant to us, and it has a context to us, and it has a past, and it makes it more hurtful. And so, families, they have to be really careful of that, because they do have this background. And we do, we talk about in the interpersonal class that messages have a content and a relational message. And the content is that the face value of the message. So if you say, please pass the salt, you're wanting me to just literally give you the salt. But the relational message is there might be a lot of sarcasm behind that, because I cooked another bad meal and I never cook good meals. And then I start taking it as a disrespect issue. Yes, he always wants to put salt on my meal, on everything I cook. He doesn't appreciate anything I do, and he doesn't clean up the house. Whatever it is, it starts to get into this whole relational baggage. That relational message is what starts a lot of conflict. Yeah. In families, more often than the content. We're rarely really fighting about the salt. We're fighting about the context surrounding the salt.
Many years ago, I read somewhere, I can't remember where, that there is also a different gender when it comes to communication. And there was this hypothesis that women tend to get along better because they speak more. But then there was a counter research showing that actually men use as many words as women. Mm-hmm. So where are we in terms of research in that particular area?
Gender is still such a mess. It's so contradictory. One minute it seems like, yes, there's a huge gender difference on some issue, and then the next article comes out and says, no, there aren't gender differences. While we have classes in gender communication, I think it's great to talk about, and I do think there are some tendencies here and there. I'm, for the most part, not a big believer in men behave this way and women behave this way, not from my own personal research. I think it's interesting to learn about. Students like hearing about that males tend to do this and females tend to do this. There are tendencies, but there certainly aren't absolutes in any way. Even something as simple as self-disclosure. There research has said that women self-disclose more personal information about themselves than males do, that males are more closed. But then later research will tell you, well, it depends who the male's talking to. It's specific on the person. So sometimes males disclose more to females. Okay, one study says that. The next study says, no, males disclose more to males, but they tend to do it while in joint activity. And a lot of research has said that. Like males could talk about their children or their wives while they're playing basketball. That communication comes out while they're doing something, where females might be more likely to self-disclose sitting in a chair next to each other on a couch or at a restaurant, something like that.
And another study that I read about, which I found really fascinating, it was someone who was claiming that one of the big differences between genders was communication in the restrooms. And basically what they were saying is males say very little to each other, and the hypothesis is, well, they don't want to be seen like trying to, make a pass on another male, while females tend to talk a lot. And this stereotype that when a group of men and males and females go to a place, and so one says, I'm going to the restroom, all the females go together.
Yeah, it's a social activity.
What is really behind all that?
I think it's just another little bonding opportunity when females see it that way. We've talked about this in my class before, the rules of restroom behavior. and the male students will talk about having space between the stalls,
yes.
all of these types of things. Yeah. I don't know that there's any great scientific research behind that, but I think a lot of it does have to do with, women do take a lot of bonding opportunities whenever it is to, here's a time where we can talk. And sometimes in the bathroom, the children or the husband or your friends or other family members aren't around, and so you have that opportunity to talk to that person, so you do. I know one of the scholars in our field that really does believe that there is some distinction between males and females, the way they communicate. She's kind of famous for her book is Deborah Tannen, and one of her books, You Just Don't Understand, she talks about that males speak for report and females speak for rapport. And so that more of males' communication, if it's for rapport, is about status, and females' communication rapport is about making connections. So she says that males tell more jokes and males communicate in this way and participate in humor in this way because it's really about status and to some extent power, where females, they communicate to connect and not to always kind of establish power and boundaries, but instead to connect people.
Will you say that then, that's maybe a weird conclusion, that females who get engaged in comedy tend to have a different stance in life? Yeah. So they're trying to project some kind of power by doing that?
Yeah, and I know, and I've heard this people say casually, some people don't like female comedians as much because they're not comfortable with the way that they've created these jokes. They're used to males doing that.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking, I don't know if you have seen her, Sarah Silverman.
Yeah.
Because she is very, very in-your-face type of comedy.
Almost masculine. She's kind of masculine. Yeah,
especially because
she's funny.
She's funny, but she talks a lot about sex and things that usually are reserved in the stereotype to male comedians anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's changing. You're seeing more female comedians, and just that type of humor is becoming more acceptable for women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another area that you have studied is interpersonal communication in the classroom.
Yeah.
What has been the major findings that you can report in that particular area?
Oh, there's so much education research right now. One of my recent studies that I looked at was humor in the classroom. And there's so many different things. Kind of the hot topic right now is media use in the classroom, and should students be allowed to text and do all of these extra things during class. And there's been a ton of research about immediacy in the classroom and how faculty can create connection with their students in the class, and how students can create immediacy with other classmates as well. But some of my research has been on humor, and I had read a few studies that were about teachers' use of humor, which was kind of a new angle. We'd heard about class clowns for a long time, especially in high school and elementary school, and there's a lot of research about them, but not a lot about professors and what's appropriate humor, because, in a lot of ways, much of what we're saying in the classroom isn't monitored. For faculty, we have a lot of freedom in the classroom, so this group of researchers wanted to look at what's appropriate use of humor. And they found some interesting things, like faculty had to be careful, kind of limit self-deprecating humor, because that did hurt their credibility as a faculty member. They certainly couldn't pick fun of students. That was not cool to students at all. And, they had not too much self-disclosure to make the students uncomfortable. They didn't want to hear about their sex life, or, that they need to kind of remove themselves from their too much personal information. So then a student of mine, she said, well, what about students' humor, though? It's just, there's a lot of humor going on from the students. This is a kind of a give and take. Obviously the faculty members' humor is often dependent on what the students feel like in the class. Do they like humor? Are they funny? So I said, yeah, I haven't really found any research on that. We kept digging around, and so we ended up doing focus groups we did 10 focus groups here at SIUE with students of all different majors, and asked them about students' use of humor. And, they did like it, but they did feel like there were classes where it needed to be controlled more, that they felt like some faculty members allowed more of it to have a fun, enjoyable class, and they thought it was a good thing that their students were really bonded and seemed to be having fun in class. But the students said, fun's not always great. You think that we want to have fun, but it depends on the class. It depends if this is a core class in my major. It depends if it's a difficult class, how they kind of rate the classes are supposed to be easy or difficult. It depends how much I need it, and I need as a foundation or prerequisite for other classes. So they weren't always so happy about that. Some students in some classes preferred all business,
So it seems the message for professors is be careful.
Yeah, control it. Definitely control it. And then there was a lot of students are texting each other during class. They're actually joking with someone that's across the room from them over there. And sometimes it's about another student. So that, that can be harmful for the class environment as well.
And I guess that social media has changed things, because in the past that type of communication were not possible because they were disruptive in the classroom. But when you're texting to each other, you don't see the disruption. At least the faculty or even the other students don't see the disruption in the classroom.
Yeah. And then things, laptops up, and they can see things going on the laptops.
Yeah.
I was surprised to hear how much texting was going on in the class. I figured the texting was happening outside of the classroom, but they're texting someone in the classroom. Jokes and inside jokes about what was happening in the class.
And that tells something about the attention span of the students.
Yeah,
anyway.
And they're very distracting, I'm sure.
Now, I think that one easy conclusion of what we have been talking about here is that interpersonal communication is something everybody should know something about it.
For sure.
How do you teach interpersonal communication? Is that something that should be taught no matter what, because it's essential for life, for personal relationship, for professional relationship? Tell us about the importance of knowing more about interpersonal communication.
Oh, I definitely think it's important. I think it's something that you can learn your entire life, that, take as many experiences as you can in it. I kind of joke, I teach family communication, and I have 3 children. I still don't know how to communicate with my children. I have a PhD in it, and I'm practicing it every day with my children. But whenever I can, if I can hear some expert speak about it, or I find a new book about meltdowns or sibling rivalry, anything like that, I read that. I absorb it, because you can learn it, but you constantly have to practice it and improve it. And you often forget the things you learn. I could have had a student take an interpersonal class 5 years ago, but now they're coming up against new experiences. They weren't married when they took that class, for example, or they didn't have a partner, and now they do, and they're facing different challenges. How do I how do I make concessions with my partner? How do I accommodate with my partner? And it's not something they had to deal with when they were 18 taking the class. So for me, I think as much interpersonal experience as you can get, the more you can read about it. If you can take workshops or classes, whether it's interpersonal in your organization or interpersonal in your family, you've got to do it. So, yeah, it's one of those classes a lot of our students take as a freshman. Great. Sometimes we get older freshmen that take it, and they really seem to absorb a lot and say this is really helpful. And just to take different variations of it, our interracial communication class, I think everybody needs that. Our family communication class is really helpful. Even the computer-mediated communication class is really helpful to understand how people communicate in that way.
Okay. Let me ask a question now to our engineer here, because this conversation is so interesting. Can we make another episode of this and continuation of this one for this show?
I see no reason why not.
Okay,
we could.
So
It's up to you.
Yeah, so do you have more time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let's. He's gonna tell us when to stop for the. Or should we do it an hour long? What do you think, Mike?
We have the time if you wanted to go ahead and...
Just an hour long or two chapters of half hour?
We can do it all right now and actually just air it twice.
Okay.
You know, part 1, part 2.
Okay.
Or we can schedule another date. But since
Okay.
you're here, if you want...
Okay, let's keep talking about, because I have a lot of questions.
Okay,
and this is
sure.
so interesting that we're talking about interpersonal communication anyway. So now you were talking about when you start to establish a special relationship with other people. And I know you have studied the issue of dating and interpersonal communication. And I'm sure that some of our audience who may be into dating or thinking about that may think, maybe I need to take classes in interpersonal communication so I can really impress a date when I meet this person. Is that something that is recommended, or what are your thoughts about it?
Well, I don't know if I can help them necessarily get a date, but I have definitely had students who, you know, they're playing the field, which is so different now than when I did it. But I've had them and they've asked me, you know, I've tried this approach, this doesn't work, or how come my relationships always fall apart, or I can't seem to keep things going. And I have talked to students about that and given them some strategies. And certainly there are things that they can learn in the class about that. I mean, in one of our classes, one of the theories we look at is how relationships come together, the 5 stages, and how relationships come apart in the 5 stages. Just studying those stages, when they hear about them, I say, oh, I see why I never get past the experimenting stage. I've got some problems in the experimenting stage. This is why I never get past. Or intensifying, that stage is really uncomfortable for me, because that's where more of my personal background starts to come out, and this is where I have to kind of be vulnerable and kind of let down my guard a little bit, and that's the part I'm not comfortable with. So even sometimes just hearing about stages of relationships, students say, okay, I see what some of my issues are. So we don't diagnose in the class, you know, I don't problem solve individually with students, but when they learn the concepts, they are self-diagnosing and they are figuring out where their hang-ups are and ways that they can improve. So I think it could help them, yeah.
Okay. Now, are there kind of clinics for people who want to improve their interpersonal communication? It's a kind of, I mean, I do have a problem, can you help me with this? Are there that kind of help for individuals who feel they're kind of handicapped in this area?
You know, not so much. Not like there should be. That's where I think there's kind of the disconnect between psychology and therapy and communication, is we don't have those sort of connections. Because it's, do you want to go to a family therapist? Do you want to go to a counselor? Do you want to go to SIUE counseling services? There's that. And a lot of people view counseling as something I go to when I'm in trouble or when my relationship has gone really bad. And, you know, a lot of marriage counselors will say, marriage counseling can work, but it often doesn't work because people come to us when they've already talked about divorce, or they've already drawn up the papers, or if you've already seen the lawyer, you know, this is the wrong time to start this. So they always say, you know, really you have to start that relationship with the counselor before you have problems. Or when I studied in my master's program, premarital counseling, they believe you should start a relationship before you even get married. with your counselors so that you can kind of get that connection going and always have a space to talk about with your relationship with an outside party instead of just your partner. So no, other than therapy or counseling, there really isn't a good place for people to go just to get help with relationships, and there are self-help books flying off the shelves about this topic. Some are written by very reputable people in our field, and some are written by people sitting on their couch and coming up with ideas, you know.
Now, I was wondering about the issue of dating. Now that same-sex marriage is becoming more and more accepted legally in so many states, and people are much more open about it, is there any difference, and since we touched on the issue of gender before, is there any difference when it comes to this type of relationship between same-sex couples versus couples of different genders?
Yes, yeah, there is. And some of our early research, there weren't enough different types of relationships to get a clear understanding of the differences between heterosexual and homosexual relationships. But now we do have a lot more research in that area. And some researchers are finding that there are differences between how they carry out their relationships. There's certainly similarities at their core. Obviously, why they are interested in marriage, not just for the legal reasons and financial reasons, but also because there are a lot of similarities relationally. But there are differences as well. I was just working with one of our master's students on her thesis, and she looked at lesbian dating scripts. And it was really interesting because there's kind of a typical script for a male-female, heterosexual relationship. And it's still, although it's changed through the years, it still has a pretty similar script with typically a male still in the more powerful position and kind of seeking out the female. But it's different when it comes to lesbian relationships. They don't always have that kind of same script. And so it was fascinating to see all of the different quotes that she had in her in-depth interviews about the ways that they had started their relationships. And a lot of it is because there isn't that inherent power difference because of having male and female. On the other hand, a lot of those females did grow up still with kind of a heterosexual mindset until they became older, until they were adolescents or preteens, where they started to say, oh, I'm seeing things a little bit differently. I think I might be a lesbian. But they did spend a lot of their lives, we talked about, they spent a good portion of their time as a child playing mommy with their dolls and buying pink irons and pink ironing boards and doing those kinds of things to someday grow up and be in a heterosexual relationship. So you can't take that aspect away from them. They still have that. It's still socialized into them. But yet now they have an alternative lifestyle.
Okay. I was wondering, listening to you, if when you meet people and the people discover that this is your area of expertise, and because of that, you may be analyzing the other person in terms of both the verbal and non-verbal signals. If they get some kind of scare, like this person is going to crack through me, have you sensed that type of,
yes,
of responses?
For sure. Yeah, my husband used to like to say when I was doing my dissertation, people would say, "Oh, what's your dissertation about?" And he'd say, "Disappointment in marriage." And people would look at him and look at me, and he's like, "Yeah, isn't that nice?" And I'd say, "Well, it wasn't spurred on by my own marriage. Not to say that there haven't at some point been disappointments, but it wasn't because of that." But yeah, it's challenging. People, they think that maybe you could be their counselor sometimes, or they're just plain afraid of you because, they think that you're going to analyze them And I've even seen people nervous around, is my parenting okay? What did you think about that? I don't know. When I'm in work mode and I'm in friend mode, and they're two different modes. I'm not going to judge you about that. Yeah. And I teach public speaking, so people get antsy about that as well. They say, "Oh no, what are you going to say about my speech? A toast or something like that. What grade did you give me on my toast?" And of course, I always give them A's,
Well, one of the most famous statistics that is out there is that the single-issued people fear the most, even more to death or something like
more than snakes.
Public speaking.
Even more than snakes.
Yeah, is public speaking.
Yeah, it is. It's still the number one fear.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting. Now, there is this say out there that it is always healthy to express your feelings, to express your emotions. Is that really advisable when it comes to interpersonal relationships?
No, that is not always a good idea, because sometimes, it could be a momentary aggravation or frustration that you're feeling, and why pour that out on your relational partner, whether it's your mom or your friend or whoever it is. There are times when, you need to bite your tongue and not express every emotion that you feel, because then the other person has to deal with it. Now you've made it their problem, your anger or your guilt or your sadness that maybe could have been dealt with on your own and quicker, and not have to make it everyone else's burden. So no, I don't think you should express every thought and feeling. I don't think that everyone should be completely honest with each other all the time. I don't think that's a good. And my students always want to talk about that when we get in. We talk. I used to teach a honesty and deception class. I haven't taught it for quite a while, but they always want to say, well, I believe that you should tell the truth all the time, and then we'll get in a debate about that, and then we'll say, well, there are different types of deception, and some can be useful in relationship contexts at times. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm advocating everyone go deceive people, but, there are times when you just need to bite your tongue.
On the other hand, there are some that say that if in a relationship, let's say between husband and wife, if one of those individuals is too mouth shut, that doesn't want to express almost anything, that can also be a problem.
For sure, yeah. And people are different on their expressiveness, but especially if you have a partner that really seeks expressiveness from you, that's going to be a challenge, because they're always feeling like they're pouring more in and not getting as much back out from you. And it can cause trust issues as well, because they feel like, I've made myself vulnerable. I'm out here to you, and you're not out here to me. So what are you hiding? Or what's so dark about you that I don't get to find out? So it hurts trust for sure.
You mentioned earlier that one of the areas in your field has to do with interpersonal communication in the workplace, and especially the relation between the boss, so to speak, mm-hmm. and the subordinates. For those in the audience who have some kind of power position, executive position, what would be your best recommendation to them in terms of how should you express yourself to your subordinates? What would be the best way to come across as a person who's going to be likable, who's going to be respected at the same time? So what would be your words of advice?
Well, that's a hard one. I think a lot of it really depends on the culture of the organization. Culture is such a huge piece of it. What kind of things are they doing in this organization? How has it been in the past? What do they need more of that they weren't getting from their previous superiors? So I really think you have to kind of read the culture and read the people and see what they need more of. And I think anytime, I used to get the opportunity to do these leadership workshops when I was at the University of Texas, and just anytime you can make a connection with the people that you're leading, that you can even humanize yourself, because as you see yourself as a leader, you see yourself as a human that has feelings and interests and things outside of your workplace, but they don't always see you that way. They see you as this figurehead or this person of power that can give things or take things away. And so when you make some sort of connection with them, even if it's personally, just a little bit of connection, I think goes a long way to show that I'm interested in you, or I'm interested in your work. And always a lot of positivity. Too often people get caught up in criticism, and while criticism can be useful for improving tasks, improving the job, but it has to be balanced with a lot of positivity. When it's not, especially people who are, always concerned about themselves and worried about if they're doing a good job, they take any little bit of criticism and worry about it even more and think, I hope I'm doing a good job, and I'm not. And so they need a lot of positivity. Mm-hmm. Even as a teacher, we say, if you were to give some critique to your students, always try to balance it out with positivity. Some people say 2-to-1, some people say 3-to-1, just some way to say, hey, I noticed some great things about you as well. So I think that can go a long way, kind of reading the culture, showing some connection to your subordinates, and using a lot of positivity.
I have also read that it is important for a leader to look authentic.
Yeah, I
That
would
is
agree.
not to be a concealed person, a person who has like somebody. But I guess there is always this fine line between being authentic and being too down to earth that
Right.
doesn't show that you have certain authority. What is that line? What
That's a hard line.
That define in that area?
Yeah, I don't know if I know that line. I think that's hard. I mean, I think professors struggle with that in the classroom sometimes too, especially, I know in our field we do, because it is interpersonal communication in all of our communication classes. You know, it's hard not to talk about your own relationships in the classroom, but then you want to protect your family's privacy and also not to be like, hey, I'm one of you, because in some ways you are, but I also have to maintain that authority. So I think it's kind of a dialectical tension for a faculty member, just as it is for a subordinate and superior, is I want to be with you, but you still have to know that I'm your boss. And I mean, parents deal with that too, you know, with teenagers, as they're kind of letting them leave the nest more to say, hey, we're friends, we're buds, but there's still that dialectical tension of I'm still your mom, and I still have to control some of what you do, and you have to follow my rules. So yeah, it's always going to be a tension. I was going to say one other thing about the leadership I was thinking about was one workshop I led a long time ago at the University of Texas we talked a lot about was assessing your subordinate strengths. And I think a lot of times people aren't aware of their own strengths, and certainly their superiors aren't aware of their subordinate strengths. And so playing to each other's strengths, you know, kind of finding out, what are you good at? Oh, great. You know, I need somebody that's good at computers. We needed somebody who's really good at that. You know, can you take that task on? And because a lot of times people are placed in the wrong positions that doesn't take the most advantage of their strengths, and then they're just turning their wheels and they're frustrated, and I just think that a lot of times we don't make use of that. That's even something we teach our students when they're doing group projects. Is I always say in my advanced presentations class, you've met your group, find out what each person's good at. If she's good at research, you know, you need to know that. And this person's good at making PowerPoint or Prezi, great, find that out. This person loves talking off the cuff, then give them that interactive portion of your presentation. Once you find out everybody's strengths, then you can lead them better and make sure that everyone's more motivated for the task as well. But too often we just, you know, we plot people and say, you're going to be on this project, I'm going to put you on that task, and they're not motivated and they're not interested, and it's not really helping anybody.
Okay. I was wondering too, given the extreme use now of social media, particularly among younger people, but I can see that also among older people, to what extent social media has changed interpersonal communication?
Drastically. I think it has changed it drastically, and I feel like I'm always trying to keep up with it, trying to understand how they use it. I ask my students about it all the time because I'm behind. You know, I was a late adopter, as they call it. I was a late adopter for Facebook. I was a late adopter for texting. Half the time I don't know what they're talking about when they talk about some new app or their Vines or whatever they're talking about. I'm trying to keep up, but I do think it's drastic. Even when they talk about dating relationships, it's so different. And my senior project students did a project on this spring, and because of the labels that you get on Facebook, whether it's complicated, divorced, married, single, dating, you get to put what your relationship status label is. And they've said Facebook's trying to keep up and keeps adding new labels because people say, I don't know which one I am. I can't figure out what to put. But even so, the students have said it's not enough labels. It's still hard. And just the act of labeling changes their relationship. You know, what if your partner puts in a relationship and you put, you know, dating around, or I can't remember the exact name of the label. I don't do that label. But, you know, your partner is in a relationship and you have that you're dating around. That speaks not only a trouble in your relationship, but now best friend and grandma and everyone else knows that you and your partner have a different idea of your relationship status. And so it even alters romantic relationships. It's crazy.
I remember that one of the things that shocked me when I learned about that was quite common, because obviously for people of my generation that was unthinkable, is people who break up by texting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like, shouldn't be more sensitive and have a face-to-face conversation about that.
Yeah.
But they break up, which also tells you about maybe these interpersonal relationships are not as strong as they seem, or at least for people of my generation. I don't know.
They say they still are. They just choose that message. They choose a different channel for that message. But we've talked about that in my classes. What's appropriate? Where do you break up? And they still say face-to-face is the best, but plenty of them have had a breakup over an email or over their cell phones or text. And yeah, I mean, a lot of them have. So it's interesting.
Okay. Now, has there been any studies that show how even after social media started to become popular, is there having any changes in the way people communicate with each other via social media?
Yes, some people are starting to study that now, studying the intimacy of relationships, and the intimacy of relationships that are only online versus, which probably to you and I sounds kind of strange, but people do have what they deem as close relationships with people that are just online, and face-to-face relationships. There is research on that. I would say it's still early stages. There's not a lot of clear answers on that yet. But I know that a lot of young people would argue that they think their relationships are closer because of social media. They think that they can't understand how we did long-distance relationships in the past. You called each other up on the phone every night and had a long conversation. You couldn't text your partner all day long about all the little nuances of the day. No. And so they perceive it as closer than what we have, because they can constantly communicate with their friends and family where we didn't. I talk about my brother and I, when I was in college, would call each other on Sunday. That was our big call. And because I was poor, I would call and let it ring once and then hang up, and then he knew that meant he would call me back and put it on his tab. And my students, they laugh. They say, "You only talk to your brother once a week?" And I said, "I thought that was pretty good, We felt really connected, that I didn't know other people that talk to their brother once a week, and they think it's terrible because they constantly are communicating with people all day long, Now,
you think that because of that, people also have become more casual
yes,
in the way they portray themselves in public?
Yes, and a lot of people talk about the way they write has become more casual, that it's really, some people are critical of it, to say that it's dumbed down our language, that no one writes a formal letter anymore. People don't write a nice card. You just send a quick text or Facebook, "Happy birthday." You don't go buy the $5 card at Hallmark, So, yeah, it certainly has made us more casual, and people have talked about that, and especially in students writing, it's changed the way students write.
Yeah, because I see a lot of students not using punctuation, capitalization. Sometimes it's like a stream of letters, and you have to decipher to see what you're really trying to say.
Yeah. I remember the first time I got a LOL from a student. And I thought, when I was a kid, we used LOL for lots of love.
Yeah,
so
that's not what I mean.
I couldn't figure out why that student had sent me lots of love. And then, we have a problem here.
Well, the funny thing is there are some people who thought that was what that meant, and they use it like when someone gave a bad news.
Yeah, LOL.
LOL, no,
that's not nice. Yeah, that's not nice.
It's the opposite.
Or they say something not so nice to you and throw in an LOL, like it's a disclaimer there that this was just a joke. Well, be careful.
Yeah,
that can be perceived wrong.
Absolutely. Now, let's go back a little bit to again nonverbal communication, because I don't think people are really aware of what they do. For example, crossing their arms, which is a very defensive type of thing, the way they cross their legs, and especially in the way they look at each other. Because you may think, well, all the eyes are the same. No, the way you express the way you look at someone means something. Do you think that we need people to better understand the meaning of those signals in order to improve communication in general in our society?
For sure. Yes, definitely. I mean, some of what we talk about, even in our classes, is professionalism, just the differences in professional nonverbal communication, because a lot of it comes from nonverbal. So, things like professional dress versus casual dress, and that's changing too. That's gotten a lot more casual. And and to say, what does business casual mean? What does formal mean? And that dressing up isn't Saturday night dressing up. Looking sexy isn't dressing up professionally. So we definitely talk about that, sort of the dress side of it, and then how to carry yourself. If you're stepping into an interview, what do you do, and how to even give a firm handshake and direct eye contact, especially in our culture. And we've talked about eye contact in my class, that less than 50% of eye contact usually is perceived as dishonest, untrustful, not worthy, or not interested, apathetic. Lots of characteristics you don't want associated with yourself just because you're unwilling to give eye contact. We also know that superiors tend to give less eye contact and subordinates tend to give more eye contact. So usually the person who is trying to get a little bit more power is seeking their power and trying to hold the eye contact with the other. And you can see this. There are taped interactions of superior subordinates where, let's say they want to come in and talk about a problem that's happening around the office, and the superior is shuffling with the mail. Yeah, that sounds like a problem that needs to be taken care of. And it's kind of a way to say,
not particularly interested in what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, that's a problem, but I'm not going to deal with that right now. And it still kind of maintains that person's power and maintains the floor. But yeah, so certainly, eye contact, gestures. I always laugh because there are certainly students in class that you see that they're not aware of their nonverbal sometimes when they're in class, that they're snarling at you or scowling at you. And we talk about it in class, and some students say, yeah, I've been told I scowl a lot. You do. You do scowl a lot. Yeah. You need to be careful of that. So, yeah, it's something to talk about. I also saw a study recently. Now, this was on TV, and I wasn't familiar with the researcher, so I can't tell you how credible the source was. But they talked about that actually sometimes when you're concentrating, it is better to cross your arms. That when you see people trying to make a difficult decision and they're standing around in a group, they cross their arms. And they said that's because it has to do with crossing the midline. I've heard of how when your right arm's doing something on the right side and your left arm's doing something on the left side. But when you cross the midline, you're using both the left and the right hemisphere of your brain. And so sometimes crossing your arms is actually a way for you to concentrate more using both sides of your brain. That's pretty interesting. So crossing your arms can be good, it can be bad. Could signal, I'm really focused on what you're saying. But a lot of times, if it's combined with a slouchy posture or something, might be, I'm bored or you're annoying me.
Yeah. Okay. Once I read a phrase which I think I found it to be totally true in my own experience as a teacher, which is that students may not listen to what you're saying, but they are watching you.
Oh, yes, for sure.
And I think that most professors don't realize that.
For sure.
Is that something you have found in your research?
For sure, yes. Yeah, that's kind of goes back to that idea that 70% of what we say is actually nonverbal, is more than what you're saying. But for sure in the classroom, and I've done enough peer observations when I was a peer mentor here on campus, and I knew that faculty I would talk to afterwards were not aware of what their nonverbals looked like, that they might come off looking distracted or unprepared, and they didn't realize that some of the shuffling and things that they were doing had that kind of message. They thought of it as, well, I've got to get this stuff done over here, and I'm just doing it the first 5 minutes of class. But yeah, you went in 5 minutes of class, they're ready to hear what you have to say. And we always talk about that with our teaching assistants, the way they dress and carrying themselves, because sometimes they're only 2 years older than our students, So trying to carry themselves as professionally inside and outside of the classroom as possible.
Okay. So to what extent is personality important when it comes to interpersonal communication?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Personality is definitely important. Now, personality is something that comes from, well, it's either genetic or it's from your external environment. So it's very difficult to change. It's very resistant to change. And most people would say communication is more, oh gosh, it's more moment by moment. So communication is definitely more changeable, something that we can work with. But of course, you can modify your personality as well. And I think a lot of ways to modify your personality is through changing the way that you communicate. So if you've always been an introvert, for example, maybe it's because you're really uncomfortable communicating with others. And if you can get more comfortable with that, you'll be less of an introvert.
Okay. Well, despite the fact that our engineer, Mike Cathy, has done a great job in expanding this show from a half hour to 1 hour in an impromptu way, I have more questions, but let me finish with one that I think that I finish with all our interviewees here is, what is your next big project? What can you tell us about that in the next minute and a half that we have?
My next big project is looking at female faculty mothers and trying to figure out ways for them to balance work and family in a way that helps them, that they can seek the most out of their career and still spend as much time with their family as they can and try to maintain some sort of balance. I did 22 in-depth interviews here, and I've published some of that work. But it really was more about diagnosing the problems and the challenges that they have. And I so desperately want to move past what are the challenges to finding some real solutions, not just at this university, but just universities everywhere and for mothers in general, just to figure out ways to balance better.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a very interesting thing, and looking forward to hear what are going to be the results of that, because I think that people don't realize how important interpersonal communications are in sentimental, professional, just friendship type of relationship today. And as we said earlier in the show, most problems in human society today are communication problems, and certainly interpersonal communication is a big, big part of it.
Yes.
So, well, thank you very much to Professor Alicia Alexander, who is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Speech Communication at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. And next week, we're going to have a show with Dr. Maurice Taylor of the Department of Public Administration and Policy Analysis, who will be talking about the importance of public law. So stay tuned.
This has been Segue with Dean Aldemaro Romero, a production of the Department of Mass Communications at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. All rights reserved, 2014.